Hi, everyone, and welcome to Professionals Unplugged. Thank you for joining me for another candid conversation about work. I'm Inga Hepton, your host and owner of Medea International. So, I'm an executive coach, and my mission is to help people improve their impact and success, especially by supporting leaders develop their executive presence. With me today, I have Patricia Selmo. Patricia is a spiritual business and transition coach and a fantastic mentor coach. And I speak from experience. She has a unique ability to tune into others and has turned that into her superpower, now helping her clients to grow and blossom. And I have Meredith Bell. She is the co founder and president of Grow Strong Leaders. Her company publishes software tools and books that help people build strong relationships at work and at home. Meredith is an expert in leader and team communications, the author of 3 books, and the host of the show Grow Strong Leaders podcast. And last not but least, I have Richard Perry. Richard is a management consultant at PwC, a big four consulting and accounting firm. He's part of the commodities group, helping clients with strategic challenges around clean energy transition and commodity markets. In his spare time, he co founded the Rotary Club of Innovation, a nonprofit focused on creating inclusive growth within Houston's technology industry. So, the topic for today is how to make a sustainable change in your communication skills. And as we have kind of 3 different experts on communication here, I thought we'd just break it down first and have a little bit of a conversation. What is actually good communication? And Meredith, I know you've written a book about it. And so I was hoping you could just give us, in a nutshell, a brief view of your view or opinion what good communication is actually.
First of all, it's the most important skill I think that people need to have to get things done at work. It's the ability to both send clear messages to others and receive back the messages that someone else is sending and be able to interact in a way, to me, in which both parties feel good about the exchange and there's clarity around whether what needs to be done, what someone feels about a particular topic. It's the ability to exchange information in a way that has, to me, a positive impact.
I totally agree with Meredith. It's the giving and the receiving, both sides of information, and preferably in an accurate way, because there can be lots of, funny or not so funny things that happen when communication is not happening correctly. So
So, what's bad communication then?
I think it's when the signals get crossed, right? Like it's not like what I said is not what was received, basically. Just like in a radio transmission or something like that, where I'm thinking I'm saying a certain thing, and the other person on the other end is not hearing the same thing or understanding it really even in the same way because of maybe their own experiences, their own filters, or sound in the room. It could be anything, but if it's not being received in the way it's intended and meant to be, and the information is accurate, then it's not a good communication.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll just jump in and say, if your point isn't getting across, then the communication has failed. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Nice succinct way of saying it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you know that your point is not getting across?
That's a little tougher. Usually time tells with that one, where you might have a conversation with someone, you leave with a feeling, they leave with a feeling of a mutual, hopefully a mutual understanding. But later down the line, you might realize that what you asked of them or what was asked of you was misunderstood in some way, and that end result wasn't actually achieved.
And, building on that, I think a key aspect, especially when you're having a conversation around something that needs to be done, having that agreement at the end of the conversation so you don't have those misunderstandings and you get the clarity. So, just to summarize, here's what we've agreed. You're going to do this, I'm going to do this, the deadlines, so that both parties are clear and you have the chance to ask the other person, does that match your understanding of what we've agreed to? Because we can make these assumptions that get us into trouble. And so I think the key aspect of making sure there are not misunderstandings is clarity. And, that to me also ties in with what kind of trust is there between the two people. So let's say your manager says, I need this by Friday. And the other person realizes, well, there's no way I'm going to get that done, but I'm not about to say that now. And so there's this lack of honesty, in the exchange. And so that willingness to be honest and say, you've given me three other priorities this week. They can't all be done by Friday. So what's the number one? So asking the person to help you clarify so that you can reach this agreement at the end of the exchange.
Yeah, I would love to pick up on something you said, Meredith, about clarity, because that comes up in coaching a lot and probably in any kind of conversation. That is the idea that sometimes people say words and assume, because maybe they're common words, that the person they're speaking to has the same definition as them of that word. And so someone might say, I'm really upset, or this is making me anxious, or, whatever, this has to happen quickly. Well, what does quickly mean? What does upset mean? What does anxious mean? Like having those clarifying questions available to you so that you're both speaking the same language, so to speak.
I was listening to a podcast this morning, ironically, also around communication and building good habits. And one of the things people were bringing up that there are obviously three types of conversations or three types of communication. You have the practical conversation, which is about, tasks, things to do. You then have the emotional conversation or the emotional level, and then the social one, which also requires every single individual to really pay attention, not just to the actual words and seek out clarification, but also pay attention to what else is going on, right? So because part of communication is obviously the nonverbal communication, and the listening is
Yeah. I was
I
going to
mean,
bring that up actually.
yeah, you can't have a great communicator who is not able to listen. But the more you think about it, the more complex the matter becomes, because all of a sudden you have to pay attention to so much different type of input. And I think the questions and asking the questions then is really helpful to say, okay, hang on a minute, what kind of conversation are we having here? Do you want me to listen on a emotional level and respond on an emotional level? Or are we still talking practical here? Do you want me to bring a solution to the table? So I found that quite interesting and quite revealing, just to listen to that and have a different definition and a different outlook on what we usually think of communication and communicating with others, whether that's at work or at home.
And perhaps, right, we've been having a conversation so far, I think a little more related to task-based communication, getting things done. It would be interesting to expand it to other forms of communication as well. But one thing I will say about task-based communication that's been helpful in my work is when I was first joining the firm, when I was being managed by some folks, they would ask me to repeat back to them what I thought my task was, and that would allow me to kind of regurgitate the information that they gave to me in order to see if I truly did understand. So as I've come to grow older in the firm and manage others, I've used that same technique, and it's a good way, a simple tool to really align on an understanding of what needs to be done. But when it comes to, you know, leadership and social communication, that's a whole different story.
Yeah. Well, let's bring it to that, because you just gave a fantastic segue onto that. When we think about and meetings, whether those are virtual meetings or in person meetings, what would be a good habit for somebody to change, implement, be aware of in order to create better communications at work?
I would love to jump on that listening ship again and just say, I think one of the best habits to cultivate is to stop talking and listen and listen actively. So, not listen with, what am I going to say next? Or they're saying this and now I'm going to say that. But really actually listening to understand, which I think is really difficult for most people if you haven't developed that habit. And so, yeah, there was something else I was going to say about that, but it went away. So I'll chime in when it comes back.
I'm with you there, Patricia. This, to me, listening is the foundational skill of communication. Most people think I'm a pretty good listener, but in reality, we're waiting, as Patricia said, waiting for our turn to talk, or we're evaluating and judging and critiquing what the person has said. And what I have learned over the years, as I've been practicing listening myself, is how powerful it is when you really do it well, because the other person feels you being there for them. And I think that curiosity is the driver that helps us not get into that judging and evaluating, but instead be fully present with that person. Because there's not just the external distractions of wanting to glance at your phone or your email. The internal distractions are sometimes the worst ones to set aside, because we have thoughts about what the person is saying, and and as long as we're holding on to that and focusing on what we're going to say, we're missing some of their message. So when we make that decision, this is a situation where I need to really be listening. One of my favorite quotes on this and bringing curiosity to listening is from a book by Steve Chandler, interestingly called How to Get Clients. And what he said in this one chapter around curiosity was basically, when you really focus on learning more about this person and being curious, as a result of your questions and your intentional being with them, what they feel is love. Well, if someone feels that we are caring about them deeply in that moment, that builds the relationship in a way that almost nothing else can.
Absolutely. I remember what I wanted to say, and that is the acronym WAIT, which some of you might have heard before, but we use it a lot in the coaching world. Why am I talking? So, if you notice that you're speaking, just to check in and wait and think about, why am I saying what I'm about to say? Because sometimes it's and it could be like, oh, I was thinking of this and it made me think of that. You were saying this, I'm thinking of that, so I want to tell my story. And sometimes it's even, well, I want to show support for the person, and I want to tell that thing that happened to me that's similar to what happened to them, which also kind of cuts their story. Then it becomes about you. So there's these layers, I think, to thinking about when we're communicating and when we're listening. There doesn't always have to be, that space doesn't always have to be filled, and to kind of check in and think, wait, why am I talking, and is it really relevant and important in that moment?
Yeah. So how do you practice that?
Very carefully. Bite your tongue.
I mean, because if I'm being, is it the right word, never mind, I can't pronounce it anyway. If I'm being challenging, I would say the any solution to implementing any kind of change is practice, right? And therefore, our conversation would be done in terms of talking about implementing sustainable change practice. But obviously, practice shows up in many different ways, and some people might actually struggle with practicing the waiting more than others for some reason. So what do you think, in particular, for a work environment where you have many people potentially speaking at the same time, you have different levels of seniority in a room, who have different perspectives, maybe even some egos? What would be good practices in order to enhance the communication of a team or different team members, really to make sure that people are not cross wiring their thoughts and nothing is being misunderstood?
Moving away from a task based thought to a more relationship based thought pattern. So instead of thinking, how do we get this thing done, shifting towards how do we make sure that everyone feels very comfortable with the solution that we're coming and that the overall end objective is as successful as it can possibly be and that everyone feels good about the work in the end. So just kind of taking that step back, but it does take a bit of patience because we all want to get stuff done. We all want to check all the boxes off of our list, but being able to kind of shift that thought process towards getting folks comfortable with what's going on and having their more long-term goal in mind is something that's helped me.
It helps to have, I don't want to use the word rules, but ground rules. How do we treat each other here? How are we going to be in meetings or in conversations, so that we all have this agreement around what's the appropriate behavior or misbehavior, and how are we going to address that if somebody, violates that agreement in a respectful way, so that we draw their attention to it. And then asking for help. As we're working on things as leaders, I think it's important to let other people know, like, I'm working on my communication skills or specific listening skill, for example, and I would like your help with that. And I'll give you a personal example from our own company. My two business partners and I have worked together now for 32 years. And so when we get into brainstorming sessions or we're talking about specific strategies, we've had a tendency to interrupt each other. It's a natural thing to have
Yeah.
happen, right? You've got an idea, you don't want to lose it. So what we've simply done is we've learned to say to each other in a very respectful way, I wasn't done yet, or please let me finish. And that draws us back, like, oh, okay. Or you were interrupting me. Just raising that awareness level. Not in there are ways you can say it that would really tick the other person off, right? But the idea is, I'm trying to improve in this behavior, or maybe others are too. And so, how can we support each other in that process? Because I think when we're trying to make a sustainable change in behavior, having support from a coach or from others is really important. It's hard to change those hardwired patterns that are in the brain and establish a new one. I like to compare it to, you've got this established highway, and now you're trying to create a new behavior, and it's like a dirt road. So it's bumpy, it's uncomfortable at first. And until you keep practicing it over and over and it becomes more comfortable and becomes its own superhighway, it's easy to fall back on that more familiar pattern. And so getting help and support along the way, I think, is important because it raises our awareness of when we're doing it well, and asking people for feedback. How have I been doing? I've been working on not interrupting as much. Am I getting better? What's your perspective? What could I do better going forward? And that helps raise the awareness of others that, hey, yeah, she's been working on this and trying to make improvements.
Yeah.
I think also giving yourself a little bit of grace around that and knowing that you aren't going to be perfect. Like you said, the road is going to be bumpy at first, and you'll probably will fall back on those old habits more at the beginning, and that's okay. just as long as you're making that progress and making those attempts, it will get better. But I think sometimes we get very frustrated with ourselves that not doing it. Oh, there, I did it again, or that sort of a thing. So just kind of like take it easy on ourselves.
You're spot on. Often enough, we're thinking, well, what's practice? I practiced it once or twice and it didn't work, so I'm not going to do it again. It's like, well, hang on a minute. You think you got it after trying it twice? But I also find that, the raising your own awareness even before you step into a room, or even before you open your mouth, and thinking about, okay, so what are the things I'm trying to get out of this in a meeting, for example? How do I remind myself throughout the meeting to be a little bit more mindful on, you know, jumping in, interrupting, talking over somebody, etc. I think the preparation starts actually before, right? So just a simple example, before I step into any of these kind of conversations with you or with others, i I make sure that I'm getting my head into the right space. I look at the different topics. I think about where could the conversation go. I even write down some of the questions. Whether or not I'm asking the questions is a different matter, but at least it gets me into a certain level of awareness and being prepared and feeling more comfortable about it. I heard about a brilliant practice at Amazon, and I think it's great, in particular when they have people of different seniority levels and people in different positions and hierarchy in the room. They created, to you, Meredith, creating a rule. They created the rule of the most junior person in the room speaks first, and the most senior person speaks last. What do you make of that?
I love the idea of it. Yeah. My first thought was thinking back on very junior days, like that might be kind of intimidating as the most junior person to be the first one to speak, because you're kind of putting your eggs out there without getting the lay of the land a little bit. I like I think the idea behind it, right? Like that they have a voice, right? They have a voice, and that it's important.
It may lead to some better decision making, potentially. The most junior folks tend to be the closest to the work itself. So giving them their opportunity to have a voice and potentially direct the conversation somewhere that it might have not otherwise gone could be beneficial.
See, two things. One, it a lot of times if the senior most person speaks first, then others tend to fall in line under that person's opinion. And so the opportunity to really hear differing opinions is lost. The other one is that many senior leaders often feel they need to be the answer person. Oh, I'm in this position, so I need to be the one to, you know, come up with the answers. And this process would help them realize, wow, there is a lot of collective knowledge here and expertise to tap into. And a lot of the times, the other people may have an even better idea than that person did. So I think there are some real benefits to that approach.
Yeah.
It all goes back to making it safe too, right? If the junior person is rewarded in some way just by the responses, the openness in receiving what they have to share, that reinforces, okay, it really is safe to
Yeah.
do it this way.
Yeah.
And be open and honest in sharing my opinion because somebody's not going to jump all over me for it.
Yeah.
I think that makes a difference too, the whole culture there, what's encouraged.
Yeah.
And just, I have a question for the group, taking that a little bit further. So we've talked about being open to feedback and asking for feedback, but then also not taking that feedback too personally or beating yourself up about whatever it is you hear. How can leaders cultivate an environment of feedback, positive and negative, constructive feedback, but have that. I guess when I receive negative feedback, sometimes it can actually kind of hit me at my core a little bit, like, oh, it's kind of like a blow to the chest sometimes, even though I ask for it, but it can sometimes still be hard to take. So how do we cultivate that environment where feedback is encouraged and the best parts of it are well received?
That's a tough question, and probably worth another conversation like this in one short
Yeah.
sentence, just kind of like a
Yes.
firing round.
If you can see it as a gift, this is information I didn't have before and now I have it. And also, it's not personal about me and my value. It's information that can help me work more effectively. And I think shifting your perception of that information makes a huge difference in how you receive it.
And I was just going to say something along the lines of cultivating a culture of trust that you're being supported as an employee. So it's okay to make mistakes, basically. If you have that, it's okay to make mistakes, and you know you're not going to get fired because of a I mean, it depends, but being able to do things and try things, and knowing that if it doesn't work, you're not going to have some negative outcome because of that. I think that also helps that environment. Then when the feedback comes, it doesn't feel so much like, oh gosh, what is this going to mean for me? It's more, okay, I can hear this now and I can take it in and do something about it in a more positive way.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, guys, thank you so much for having this conversation here with me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think we established quite a few things around communication, what it really is, and how we ourselves can actually improve our skills, in particular on the importance of listening to others, seeing some clues in their body language, and practicing our own awareness, how we are in any kind of conversation, whether that's in a bigger meeting at work, holding back and biting our tongues when it comes to just asking questions or blurting out some thoughts, really giving the room to others and making ourselves aware of really creating the space for others and inviting feedback when things not going well. But sometimes those require some rules as well, and establishing some certain meeting rules are, as we learned, certainly very helpful. So thank you for digging in with me and these onto those different aspects, and thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Professionals Unplugged. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And if you'd like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to your podcast. Until then, unplug and look after yourself.